everybody.
Good afternoon.
It's good to see you. Thanks for being with us. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you once again Len Campanero. Len comes to us in St. Louis from San Diego, and I was just saying, I'm sure San Diego is not as beautiful as it is here today. Len had volunteered for 11 years at the San Diego Zoo School, and just now he was telling me he's going to be volunteering again here in St. Louis, and the training that's involved with that, which I'll let him talk about. He has perfected studying a multitude of animals, including giraffes and rhinos, koalas, Tasmanian devils, and kookaburras, orangutans, gorillas, and bonobos. I don't know what a bonobo is, Len, you have to tell me. And our topic animal today, elephants. He's with us today because my buddy Dan heard him speak and came home and said, ooh, he's really good. We need to get him at Mason Point. And those of you who have known Dan know he doesn't say that easily. So here's Len today, and all of us are invited to sit back and turn off our phones, thank you, Mary, and learn about elephants.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Bonobo is one of the great apes. It's also called the forgotten ape. Most people are familiar with chimpanzees. And about 1.5 million years ago, when the Congo River formed, the apes that got caught on the north side of the river became what we now know today as chimps. The ones on the south side of the river became what we now know as bonobos. And bonobos are one of the few wild animals that are empathetic. And amongst the great apes, other than human beings, they're the only species where the females are in charge. Well, again, thank you. I moved here about 6 months ago and in another retirement community, and when they heard my background, I was asked would I talk to the residents about wild animals. And I said yes, and I decided to take a theme of getting intimate with wild animals, so that you're going to get a lot more than you might just simply reading a sign posted at an exhibit at the zoo, or that you might even hear from one of the docents at the local zoo or interpreters at the San Diego Zoo. I thought I would start with the largest land mammal, and that are elephants. Okay, everybody here remember the movie Born Free? 1966 it came out in the United States, a year earlier in the UK. And you're probably sitting there scratching your head saying, wasn't that about a lion? Yes, it was. Her name was Elsa. But in the movie, there was a baby elephant, and her name was Tembo. Tembo happens to be the Swahili word for elephant. Well, Tembo had been acquired by a Hollywood movie studio, and for the first roughly 10 or 11 years of her life, she spent it on the back lot in Hollywood, which is really not great for an elephant. Elephants are very social animals, and they have sensitive feet. You should never be standing on concrete or tarmac. And when she was about 10 or 11 years of age, she had fallen ill, and they wanted to give her a shot for it. And if you're going to give an elephant a shot, you're going to do it in the ear for a couple of reasons. One, the skin is the thinnest there. It's almost paper thin, not quite, but it's fairly thin, because elsewhere on the body, their skin is an inch or more thick. And then also the ear has a lot of blood vessels in it, and that's part of the elephant cooling itself by flapping its ears. It cools the blood, and that generates the cooler blood flows through the interior of the animal, almost like a car radiator. But anyhow, they didn't do it quite right. And what they did was they killed some blood vessels. In the lower left corner here, you can see that her right ear, where they gave her the shot, caused her to have her ear partially amputated. She lost about half of her ear. Well, it was after that they decided they ought to give her to somebody that knows what they're doing with elephants. And they donated her to the San Diego Zoo. And this is Tembo in her later years at the San Diego Zoo. She had almost 40 more years at the zoo. She had a lot of girlfriends to hang out with every day. She never had to walk on concrete again. She basically had close to 3 acres to roam over. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to the San Diego Zoo, but there you can actually look into the care center for the elephants, where they take care of their medical needs, give them baths and so forth. And it looks like they're standing on concrete, but it's not. It's actually hard rubber. It won't give under my weight, but it definitely gives under the elephant's weight. So she's a sweetheart, or was a sweetheart. She's passed away now in old age, but I knew her for a lot of years. They're my favorite animals, as you'll probably come to understand. Besides being quite majestic, they're highly intelligent. Their brains, the complexity of their brains is on par with primates, even human beings. And I'll talk more about that as we go. They're very social, not just the matriarchal herds, but also the bachelor herds, and I'll talk about both of those. They're one of the few wild animals that's empathetic. You've got, I mentioned, bonobos, orangutans, not chimpanzees, and dolphins are another example of empathetic animals. They like music. They like my kind of music. They like jazz, and I'll talk some about that. And they have some amazing abilities, and I'll talk about that as we go. To give you a brief background on them over time, African elephants are descendants from mastodons, and Asian are descendants from mammoths. Over the millions of years, their early ancestors of modern-day elephants, being mammoths and mastodons, not only roamed Africa and Asia, but likewise roamed through Europe and North and Central America. And they got here crossing the Bering Land Bridge. It used to be 1,000 miles wide and dry, connecting what we now know as Alaska to Russia. As a species, they diverged a little over 7 million years ago. And when species diverge a long time like that, they can't come back and breed or even breed sustainably. Your environment changes you physically, both internally and externally, as your body adapts to survival in that type of environment. So while the species are quite compatible, if they should come together and breed, the offspring will be carried to term, but survival is only about 2 to 10 days. So if it hasn't been too many years that you've diverged, I'll give you an example. Polar bears. Polar bears are actually diverged from brown bears, and they did that about 400,000 or 500,000 years ago. And in modern times, because of global warming, they're meeting up more, and they do reproduce, and they have what is called a mocha bear, and it looks like the color of coffee with cream stirred in. But when it comes to elephants, it's been too long. And because of that, zoos typically are not allowed, accredited zoos, they are. When I'm talking about zoos, I'm talking about accredited zoos. Only about 10% of the zoos in North America are accredited. There's about 2,400 zoos in North America. Roughly 245 or so are accredited, includes the St. Louis Zoo. So accredited zoos are not allowed to put the two African and Asian species together for fear of breeding. The San Diego Zoo had an exception, and the reason was that San Diego Zoo ran a geriatric herd. It was basically a retirement community for old elephants. Old elephants take a lot of extra time and energy and cost to take care of. So sometimes smaller zoos, it was stressful for them, they would send them to the San Diego Zoo. And the zoo got them from as far away as New Zealand. So in this picture here, we have Asian elephant right up front, that's Smitty, reaching up for some treats. And next to her on the right side is Mary. Mary was the oldest elephant. And then on the left side here, we have an African elephant, and that's Shaba. And the girls got along fabulously together. It didn't matter that they were different species. Now, when you ask people about what kind of elephants are there, they always say Asian and African. Well, actually, with the advances in genetic science, it's been discovered that there are really 3 species of elephants. The Asian elephant, in modern times, about 60% of those are found in India, and then about 10 other Southeast Asian countries. And then you'll find them on 3 islands, Sri Lanka, Sumatra, and Borneo. The Asian elephant is going to stand, and I'm going to talk in terms of bulls, the females being a bit smaller, but a bull, they get to about 10.5 feet or so, give or take. Weight-wise, get close to 12 to 13,000 pounds. Then what they discovered was the African elephant, there are really 2 species. In the middle, we've got what are known as the African bush or savanna elephant, and they're the largest. And they're found in East, Central, and Southern Africa. And height-wise they're going to get to be about 13 feet tall. Weight-wise, up to 14,000 pounds. And then you've got the African forest elephant, which was basically genetically different enough to be classified as a separate species rather than subspecies. And they live in the rainforests of the Congo in Central Africa and also in West Africa. So you're going to find those in rainforest. Height-wise, they're shorter than an Asian elephant. They're only about 9.5 feet tall. And it kind of makes common sense. If you're living and you've evolved and adapted to living in a forest, you know, it's good to be a little bit shorter so you're not banging your head into branches so much. You'll also notice if you look at the ears between the forest and the savanna elephant, the forest elephant's ears are a bit more rounded. They don't stick out as much. Again, so you're not catching onto branches. If you look at the tusks, you'll notice that in the forest elephant, they're closer together, they're more downward focused, as opposed to being spread out, as you can see with the African. So they're the key differences between the African savanna and the African forest. As we go forward and learn about elephants, what I'm going to do is compare and contrast the Asian with the African, so it'll give you that some insight into them, but also help you understand the significant differences and why, with all these differences, they really can't breed sustainably. Okay, we talked about size. Now, when I've got kids at the zoo, and I love asking kids questions at the zoo, I'll always ask them, what kind of elephant are we looking at? We had both, so it was always a good theater arrangement with that. And they were pretty good about picking out African versus Asian. And I would say to them, you know, how do you know? And they would say, the ears. And I'd say, well, what is it about the ears? And I'd get a shrug of shoulders. Well, I would suggest to them that, you know, if you don't have both in front of you, you know, it's kind of hard to tell, but an easy way to remember is when you look at the African's ear, it looks like the shape of the continent of Africa. When you look at the Asian's ear, it looks like the shape of the country of India, okay? Continents are normally bigger than countries, okay? So, good way to remember if you don't have both next to you, look at the shape of the ear. Now, if you don't remember the ears, another way to remember is to look at the middle of their back. The African elephant has a dip in the middle of its back. The Asian elephant has a hump in the middle of the back. There's a difference in the skin. Well, the Asian is a little bit darker, but again, if you don't have the two of them side by side in front of you, okay, look at the skin. The African elephant has much more wrinkly, baggy skin than the Asian. But the Asian, in old age, starts to lose color pigmentation and turns pink. So you don't have to be drunk to see a pink elephant. Now, let me give you an example. This is Ron Shapur. He was a big tusker. He was in the retirement community at the zoo. And you can see his whole trunk is pink. And a lot of pink on his ears and pink spots on his body. And when people would see him, they would say, is he sick? And he's not sick, he's just old. And if he was living in India, he would be regarded as a sacred elephant. Now, when we're talking about skin, their skin, like our skin, is very sensitive, even though it's much thicker than our skin. They can feel a fly land on them. They get sunburned like we do. So elephants are always throwing dirt on themselves. Now, if you're a young elephant and there's a mud puddle around, you're going to get down and wallow in the mud and cover up your body well. When you get older, you don't like getting up and down off the ground so much, okay? So what you're going to do is you see there on the right side, you're just going to grab yourself a trunk full of dirt and throw it all over your body. You're going to keep doing that. If there is mud, your preference is mud, because it'll stick to you better. But if not, you're going to throw that to give you protection from both insects and the sun. And at the zoo, you know, every week they were getting baths. So they bring them in, give them a bath. First thing the elephant did, go out, throw dirt on myself. Now, one of the other ways of telling them apart is fingers. They have a different number of fingers. So I'd say to the kids, you know, where are their fingers? And the kids would say, on their feet. And I said, no, you only have toes on your feet. You don't have fingers on your feet. Where do you think the fingers are? Well, the fingers are at the end of the trunk, okay? Now, for Asian elephants, they have a fleshy protrusion, as you can see up top there, at the end of the trunk, and it works just like a human finger. They can literally pick a dime up off the ground with that. And here you can see an actual picture of a real one. Now, looking at the drawing of the African, they have one top and bottom, okay? And that's because African elephants like to eat the leaves from thorny acacia trees, so they can reach in amongst the branches and pluck a leaf without getting stuck with a thorn. Continuing to talk about trunks a little bit, your trunk is a fusion of the upper lip and the nose. Typically, the length is 6.5 feet long. They can be longer. They've been known to be as long as 8 feet on a huge bull. Weight-wise, 350 to 450 pounds or so. With all those wrinkles, if there's a piece of fruit high in a tree that he wants, he can actually stretch all those wrinkles out to reach up to get that. And if it's really high, what he's smart enough to do is he'll roll a boulder over or a log that he can get a leg up and stretch even further. Now, the trunk has 8 major muscles on each side. And they're made up of about, for a big bull, almost 150,000 muscle units. So in his trunk alone, he's got more muscle units than we have in our entire bodies. Now, our nose, we've got cartilage in there to give it form. Elephant has no cartilage, no bone in there. It's just all flesh and muscles. He's going to use it to lift things, smell, grasp, spray, things we all think about, but he also uses it to greet with. In the morning, he's going to get up, or she's going to get up, and we have a pair of Indian elephants here, and the younger elephant is going to take his trunk, or her trunk, and put it in the mouth of the older elephant, and it's a sign of respect to the older elephant, you know, and then, you know, you're in charge. If they're a male and female and they're going to breed, they may intertwine their trunks as part of the courtship process. They use their trunk to produce sound, as we've all heard elephants do. A mother may use it to comfort her calf if the calf is unsure, if the calf got stuck in mud, lift it out, or help it up an embankment. Or if your calf and mom's moving too fast, you may grab onto mom's tail And hang on so you stay up with her. One thing a trunk is not, it is not a straw. You cannot suck water up into your mouth through the trunk. You can bring in about plus or minus 2 gallons of water, depending on size, and then you're going to spray it into your mouth because your trunk is your nose. You're breathing through that. Now, teeth. Teeth I always find interesting. It tells you a lot. Teeth are different as well. Despite having that huge mouth of theirs, they only have 6 teeth, 2 tusks and 4 molars. Tusks are actually incisor teeth. Just like your front teeth, they're made of dentine. There's nothing special about them, okay? All animal body parts are made of the exact same materials as human body parts. They're just different shapes, colors, forms, and sizes as adaptations to survive in your environment. Animal body parts do not cure anything, okay? Rhino horn, keratins, fingernail, okay? We don't chew our fingernails when we're sick, but people will buy, rhino horn as a cure from anything, for headaches to cancer. None of it works, okay? Plants cure things, not animal body parts. So never get fooled into buying animal body parts for that. Like us, we have 2 sets of teeth. They get 2 sets of tusks. They have baby tusks or milk tusks, and then their permanent tusks come in when they're about 2 years of age. Now, most elephants are going to have 2 tusks. And you're saying to yourself, Len, I've been to the St. Louis Zoo, and they got a bunch of elephants down there with no tusks. Well, that's because you're looking at Asian females. Now, Asian females, they're hiding them. Their tusk, Asian females, only grow a couple of inches. So if she opens her mouth wide, you'll see the tusks in there. And they just give them a special name. They call them tushes, because they're so small. But they're incisor teeth density. So here we've got another difference between the 2 species. The Asian female's tusks never get that long, where the African female, her tusks are going to get as long as a male's. And then I gave you a picture of the milk tusks, the first set of tusks, and hopefully you can see this. If not, if you come up later on, I'll show it to you on my computer, that first set of tusks for a baby elephant. Now, normally, less than 2% of elephants are tuskless. And when that occurs, it's really a recessive mutant gene that causes that. Humans sometimes have that. And for humans, what it does, it gives you really tiny teeth, okay? But it doesn't happen very frequently, but it can occur. Adaptation to environmental change typically takes many generations, sometimes thousands of years, to get used to a changing environment. Something happened in Mozambique, which was kind of remarkable. In Mozambique, for about 16 years, there was bitter civil war. And both sides slaughtered elephants for their tusks to use those to buy ammunition to kill each other. Well, finally, when the war was over, conservationist scientists got back into the country, wanted to see what was going on with elephants. 90% of the elephants were gone because they had been killed. But what they found was, amongst new elephants that had been born from this time going forward, rather than 2% being tuskless, 51% of newborn females were tuskless. And they did a study of it, and they found that they did a study of about 18 or 19 elephants, both tusked and tuskless. And what they found was the presence of this recessive mutant gene had become much more prevalent. And what occurred was the female got 2 X chromosomes, and one would have this recessive gene out of every 2. So that when she was mating, okay, what would happen is there was a 50-50 chance with the male. If he passed on his X chromosome, it would combine, would be tuskless. But all the males that were present all had tusks. And what the researchers found was if the female passed in the process her X gene that had the recessive trait to the Y gene from the male, it actually proved fatal to the male embryo, and it just didn't develop. And that then accounted for the fact that of the new babies born from this time, rather than being a normal 50-50 mix of males and females, 67% of the new babies were females. Now you might say to yourself, well, maybe this is a blessing for elephants, okay? If they don't have tusks, they're not going to be slaughtered by poachers. But scientists are actually concerned with downstream negative consequences because tusks are very important to African elephants. And let me show you. Obvious, you're going to use your tusk to defend yourself from lions, as you see in the center picture. But look up here on the left. We've got a mother and a baby. And the mother has her head down in the ground. It's a drought situation. Elephants have an excellent sense of smell, far better than the dogs. Probably can smell more than twice as well as a dog can. They can smell water underground. It's a drought. She knows where to dig for water. She uses her tusks to dig for water for her baby so her baby survives. And you can see that here, them drinking. And after the elephants have had their fill from the water, they leave the new well exposed so that other animals may survive the drought. Over on the right, you see an individual bull as well as a herd, and what they're doing is they're using their tusks to strip the bark off of a tree. African elephants like eating tree bark as well as the whole tree, but they like eating tree bark. And you would think and say to yourself, well, they'll just eat other things. But in doing what they do to the tree, they actually open the tree up so that other species can get nutrients from the tree, and for some species actually then live in the tree, getting in underneath the bark so that they've got shelter. So scientists are going to be watching just what is the fallout of all of this and how it impacts elephants as well as other species. Now, tusks will likewise tell you the age of an elephant. It'll give you a weather history where the elephant lived and tell you whether the elephant is a righty or a lefty. Well, age is like aging a tree. You count the tree rings. Well, in a tree, you're going to just simply cut the tree through the middle and count across the diameter, and you see how old the tree is. In an elephant tusk, if you cut across the diameter, you don't see anything. What you need, because the tusk is growing from the root moving forward, okay, so nothing ever changes with the point. It's all changing back here near the root. What you need to do is, if you've got the tusk, after the elephant has passed away, from the tip all the way back to the root, you cut along the long axis. And once you cut along the long axis, then you can count the rings and see how old the elephant was. And a scientist using a microscope can see down to the interior of those rings that are only obvious with the human eye. With the microscope can see down to the week how much growth there was and can determine then whether there was a drought or not, because the amount of growth depends on the amount of food and water that an elephant gets. So you can get yourself a weather history. Next time you go to the St. Louis Zoo, take a look at the bull elephant there, okay? Look at his tusks. See which tusk, the left tusk or the right tusk, has more wear and tear. That'll tell you whether he's a righty or a lefty, okay? Because they'll favor that tusk, just like we have a favorite hand. Now, molars are also different when it comes to African and Asian elephants. The molar here on the left, a real one would weigh about 5 pounds. The surface would be about so big, okay? The one on the right, that tooth is going to weigh about 11 pounds. and the grinding surface is going to be twice as big. Now, at the zoo, I would have models of these, and I would hold them up for the kids, and I'd say, which molar belongs to which animal? The kids know that the African elephant is bigger, so they would say the bigger tooth belongs to the African. And I would say, no, I fooled you. Size of the tooth has nothing to do with the size of the animal. A tooth tells you what types of food an animal likes to eat. Asian elephants like to eat grasses, so they need a great big grinding surface for those grasses. African elephants, they're partial to trees, tree limbs, bark, okay? So they have a higher cuspus there so they can crunch into that. So you can see another difference between the two species. Now, when it comes to humans, we've got a dozen molars in our mouth, 3 on each side, top and bottom. The elephants have 1 on each side, top and bottom. Let's take a look. So in this picture, you're looking at the top molars. Down here, lower, his big cheeks have folded in over his molars. So you can't see them even if we had a different angle. Now, if you're an elephant dentist, and there are such things as elephant dentists, if you're an elephant dentist and you're giving the elephant his annual dental checkup, you want to see all his molars, it's kind of hard to see. I mean, you're not going to stick your arm in there, and you're not going to stick your head in there. Any idea what you're going to do? A leaf blower. You're going to blow air into his mouth and add mango juice while you're doing it. And the elephant's a perfectly happy camper to keep his mouth wide open as you're giving him mango juice, and you can look at his teeth all you want. So I mentioned that to my dentist to give him an idea, and he didn't buy it. Now, we get 2 sets of teeth. Elephants actually get 6 sets of molars. And it's a lot, and that's because they eat a lot of tough things and they wear them out. Now, most mammals, including humans, our teeth erupt vertically, up from the bottom, down from the top. Not an elephant. His erupt horizontally. They come from the back of his mouth out the front. And it's almost like a conveyor belt. Let's take a look. So you remember those molars? Let's look at the diagram. So here, this purple area, this one right here, this large one, that's the molar that we were just looking at in the prior picture. He's actively using that molar to eat. He's got a corresponding molar there in the process. Now, when the elephants eat, they tend to use the front edge or the front half of the molar more than the back. So it gets a lot of wear and tear, and it gets thinner. And eventually he eats something hard that causes it to crack. And it'll just drop out of his mouth, and it doesn't hurt. I mean, it's not like us when we broke a tooth and it's going to fall out because it's all the way down in the root. But not for him, because it's his mouth and his teeth are designed simply to come forward in a horizontal fashion. So the piece will simply drop out on the ground. But back in his big head of his, this big skull, his skull basically weighs about 110 pounds. It's lighter than you would normally think because he's got a lot of cavities in that. But in that big skull of his, he's growing 2 new molars, which aren't being physically used. They're back up there in the jaw area, or beyond the jaw area. And as this is getting bigger, it's putting pressure on the one he's using. And it helps inch this one he's using forward. Continues to use this tooth over the course of a couple more years or so. The next section gets thin, cracks, breaks off, and falls out. And that process continues. This is getting bigger, putting pressure, moving this forward, and eventually these 2 that are developing come in and take the place of the ones he was using, and then 2 more are developing. And he goes through this, getting a total of 6 sets in the course of his lifetime. And there's a lot of other differences. The skulls are different. They've got a different number of ribs, a different number of vertebrae, even each having 5 toes on each foot, different number of toenails. So you can see then there's a lot to be reconciled for this baby and why that baby doesn't survive. They are herbivores. Oops. They are herbivores. Asians like grasses. They also like shrubs. Africans, they'll eat grasses, reeds. They like shrubs, trees, bark. The roots of trees as well is also a treat for them. Both love to eat fruit and vegetables. But one thing they don't like is chili peppers. And, really sensitive nose. I told you, they can smell much, much better than a dog. And they don't like the smell of chili peppers. Probably burns the interior of the nose. So farmers would often get into conflicts with elephants because elephants would raid the crops, so the farmers would put up fences. Elephants knock them down. Farmers would electrify the fences. Elephants are just as smart as they are and will get a tree and knock it over the fence or drag a boulder over and push it through, short the fence out so it can get to the vegetables. What conservationists and scientists taught the farmers basically was use chili peppers. String oily chili peppers around your fields. The elephants won't cross into your fields. Now, elephants are going to eat about 125 pounds a day at the zoo, maybe a little bit more if you're a bull at the zoo, and well over 300 pounds in the wild. Elephants, it turns out, are the world's biggest farmers. They only digest about a third of what they eat. And to show you that, here's elephant dung. Okay, now it's all sanitized and sealed. But you can see there are sticks in there, there's pieces of grass and straw and so forth. And one of the things that elephants don't destroy when they eat is they don't destroy the seeds of the plants that they eat. Okay? So there's seeds, the food and the seeds pass through their system, the seeds are undisturbed, and as it passes then through their system, the seed then is surrounded by nice, warm, moist fertilizer, and new plants and trees grow. So they're actually the world's biggest farmers. Typically, you're going to drink 50 gallons or more a day. And with all this intake, there's a lot of outflow. Okay? They defecate 15 or more times a day. I mean, think about that. You're going just about every waking hour that you have in the course of a day. At the zoo, just eating 125 pounds of food and 50 gallons of water, you're giving the zookeeper about 300 pounds of dung to clean up every day. Now, elephant dung happens to be very clean. Farmers love it. And at the San Diego Zoo, they actually used to turn it into elephant poop paper. So if you needed bookmarks, wine coasters, a journal, calendars, and so forth. The only thing they didn't sell was toilet paper. I think it was a little too rough for that. Okay, when it comes to reproduction, males once a year go into a state called must, M-U-S-T-H. And it's a Hindu word that means intoxicated. And this lasts for about 6 to 12 weeks. And what happens during this period of time, his testosterone level shoots up to 60 times normal. And it's like being on drugs, out of control and out of your mind. Even a bigger bull who's not in must doesn't want to mess around with a bull that is in must. And it's easy to see, one, because of his erratic, really fighting nature, but then also look here, coming from his temple, halfway between the eye and the ear, there's fluid, and that's caused by the hormones causing that secretion down the side of his face. And all he wants to do is find a female and breed. And both a matriarchal herd and a bachelor herd are on their annual migrations, and the bachelor herd is kind of weaving, crisscrossing several different female herds, their trail. And every time he comes across female's excretory products, he's going to sample it to see is she an estrus or not. And you literally pull it into his mouth to find out. In the roof of the animal's mouth is an organ called the Jacobson organ. Many mammals have that, many males have that. And they can better detect if a female is in estrus and wants to breed. And if once he picks up on that, he's going to follow that highway that she's leaving every hour or so as she defecates until he catches up to her. Now the female, the cow, when she's in estrus, she's only going to ovulate for 3 or 4 days, so that's a really short period, and she's anxious. She's going to be making both a series of loud and low frequency calls, and I'll talk about the calls in a little bit. And she's going to be doing what is known as the estrus walk. She is going to be strutting her stuff, okay? Normally you're just kind of lumbering along. She's strutting her stuff, and she's constantly looking over her shoulder. Has a bull picked up on my scent yet? And what she's doing is she's looking for older, bigger bulls. The theory is that the females look at them as, you grow up big and strong, my baby will grow up big and strong. So if she likes what she sees, she's going to back up to the bull and let him mount her. If she doesn't like what she sees, it's a young bull, okay? She's going to turn away from him and walk away from her. So she's going to have some choice in this whole thing. Now you're pregnant for 22 months if you're an African elephant, okay? A little bit less as an Asian. And it happens to be the longest gestation for any mammal. Your calf weight when it's born is going to be between about 165 and 265 pounds. Africans tend to be bigger, on the bigger end of the scale. Asians tend to be on the lower end of the scale. So if you're on the upper end of this scale, 250, 265, basically you are giving birth to a full-grown giant panda. It's the equivalent size, okay? And your baby's about 3 feet tall. Now you're probably sitting there saying to yourself, okay, the gestation is that long because of size. It's not just size. Because a blue whale is many times bigger than an elephant, okay, it's a mammal, and its gestation is only about 11 or 12 months. It also has to do with brain development. Baby elephants, their brains are far more developed than most other mammals, okay? So part of this is that brain development. When they're born, they readily learn what's going on in the social structure of the herd that they're born into. They readily learn the types of foods that they should be eating and remembering that, and start readily learning all those things for survival over the decades that they will face. Now, in the course of her lifetime, a female is going to give birth to about 4 or 5 babies, normally just single. Twins happen, but they're extremely rare. The interbirth interval is typically 4 years, but can be as long as 10. Now, if you think about it logically, you're pregnant for almost 2 years, and then you're nursing your baby for 2.5 years. And when you get towards the end of that period, you're ready to start breeding again. So there's your 4 years. However, if it's a period where there's a drastic drought that's going on for many years, female, she will not get pregnant, okay? And scientists have measured this for as long as 10 years between pregnancies. And the reason is she knows she can't produce enough milk for her baby to survive, and her baby's not going to have the stamina to reach the watering holes that are much further along in their annual migrations. Average life span is plus or minus 40 years. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, they live longer here. Yeah, some elephants live much longer. They live 50s, 60s. In fact, the world record, it was the Royal Thai elephant. It was lived into its early 80s. Its teeth were completely gone. They were feeding it steamed rice. And it's no different than humans when you stop and think about it. Average life expectancy for human beings is 75. Some of us make it to 110 or more, but not a lot of us do. Same thing with the elephants, to give you an idea. Typically, when they lose their teeth, life is over. Because you either try to eat and you get a digestive system blockage because you really can't crunch it up enough, or you don't eat and you starve to death. Foot infections is another issue that can affect them, but it's more the teeth than anything else. And here's Mary at the San Diego Zoo. She's an Asian, 59. She just passed away a couple of months ago. Talking about herds. Two types, matriarchal and bachelor. What you're looking at is a picture of a matriarchal herd. African savanna elephants typically have the largest of the herds. You'll have 5 to 10 or more adult females and their offspring. Asian and forest elephants, the herd sizes will be a bit smaller. There's fewer of each of those, but it's also somewhat environmental. Now, how do you transition from a matriarchal herd to a bachelor herd? Well, I always had fun with the families that would come up, and there was a boy in there. And if he looked like he was about the right age, in the family, I'd ask him how old he was, and anywhere from 8 to about 14, I'd ask. And they'd tell me, and I'd say to him, well, it's a good thing you're not a boy elephant of whatever his age was, because you would be in a lot of trouble. I said, yeah, but you're probably already in trouble. But if you were a boy elephant, by the time you were about 11, 12, 13 years of age, your mother and your aunties are chasing you out of your birth herd. And the reason is that by the time you're a teenager, you're looking for a girlfriend. And all the girls in the herd are either your sister, cousin, aunts, and even grandma. So mom chases you away before you're bigger than she is. Now at that stage of your life, you're only half grown, you're by yourself, you're more likely to get attacked by a pride of lions. So what you do is you go and you look for other males, and you join what is called a bachelor herd. It's like going to college and joining a fraternity. Now, even though you're in a bachelor herd, as a young teenage boy elephant, you're still not getting yourself a girlfriend. Because there's going to be older, stronger, smarter bulls. If he's in must when you are, he's going to push you aside. Plus, as it turns out, as I said earlier, the girls are only interested in the big bulls. Now, both herds are going to be led by the oldest. He's got the most, or she's got the most knowledge about how to find yourself from one watering hole to the next, where to find different types of foods, and so forth. But you also then have some solitary males. Older bulls just break off by themselves, or maybe as they get older, their health isn't as good, and somebody else takes over the bachelor herd, and he just kind of goes off by himself. But that's basically the herds and how you transition from one to the other. Matriarchal herd, you're born into it as a girl, you live there and die there. Okay, you never leave. Looking at a bachelor herd, we've got two different pictures here. This is in the wild, and the pictures on the right there is a small bachelor herd at the San Diego Zoo. Both of those elephants, okay, they came to the zoo from other elephants. They were in family herds, they got pushed out. In this picture, they were about 11 and 12 years of age. They're about 7,000 pounds. They're only half grown. They won't be fully grown until they're mid to late 20s. At that point, they will be pushing 12, approaching 14,000 pounds. Here in this picture, you can see then small bachelor herd, much bulkier elephants, much older elephants. My guess is 30s, probably older than that. And you can see just how physically bigger they are, how much longer their tusks are. Now let's talk a little bit about amazing abilities. To me, one of the fantastic things about them is they actually hear through their feet. Now, when you're looking at an elephant standing there on his feet, you think the elephant is standing there plantigrade. In other words, his foot is flat to the ground like your foot is. But if you can see underneath the skin, what you would see is a skeleton, like we have as a picture here on the right, a skeletal model of the elephant's foot. They're actually down on their tiptoes. And the area underneath the toes, all back in under here, is a fatty tissue. And that functions like a cushion, so they can walk softly and not get tired of being on their feet over 20 hours a day. So think about it in terms of the structure like a woman wearing a wedge. That's what it would be akin to. Now, if you look at the bottom of the foot then, what you're going to see is a large, thick callus, usually over an inch thick. And you're going to see a lot of grooves in it, and that's for traction, so you don't slip and fall. Now, when we hear elephants make sounds, we're all familiar with the trumpeting sound of an elephant. But human beings can only hear 1/3 of the things that elephants have to say. With that big skull of theirs that I mentioned to you, and those cavities in that skull, they can make what are known as infrasounds, which are below the hearing range of human beings. And infrasounds from elephants will travel through the surface of the earth 5 and 6 miles. And scientists will record the sounds and then play them back. The elephants always act in a consistent fashion with each series of sounds. One series may be a warning, a pride of lions is approaching. Another may be the matriarch telling the herd, enough at the watering hole, let's move on into the shade of the trees or continue our journey wherever we're going. What they've also found is that, like humans, we have different languages: English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese. So do elephants. Because when they play the sounds for elephants that live in one region where they would do their annual migrations into another area where their migratory paths don't cross, they don't understand each other. But when you play their own sounds, they understand themselves. They love music, especially music that they can feel with their feet and sense the sound through their feet. They like music with steel drums and jazz. Okay? They don't like all kinds of music. They held a fundraiser out by the elephants one year in San Diego, and the band was playing country western. And the elephants were taking dirt and throwing it at the amplifiers. Be careful. Yeah. So, if you go to YouTube and go and type in elephant plays piano, you're going to find a number of clips. And one of the clips shows a man playing jazz on an upright piano, and the elephant is pounding away with its trunk at the end of the keyboard, and the head's going up and down to the beat of the music. And what's great is, as it pans out, there's a second elephant. And that elephant is swaying its butt back and forth to the beat of the music. So they can sleep standing up or laying down. Now, if you're going to sleep standing up, you want to get the weight of that heavy trunk off your head. So you might do it like you have here, is put it on a tree. Or maybe if you're at the zoo, you might see an elephant with its trunk limply over a large boulder. And what they're doing is simply taking a nap. Or you might find them sleeping on the ground. And when they sleep on the ground, they like to sleep butt to butt, okay? And they like to sleep on a slope. And that makes sense because it's easier to get up if you're coming up off of a slope than if you're laying flat. Now, they don't forget, okay? It's very, very true. They don't forget. Their brain is 3 to 4 times the size of a human brain. Our brains weigh roughly 3 pounds. Their brains weigh between 10 and 12 pounds. The temporal lobes, much bigger proportionally, have many more folds in it, which gives them memory capacity. Tremendous memory capacity. They can remember decades how to go, where to find food, where to find water, when there's danger, what are the alternative ways to go. In fact, they remember even smells. And they have documented cases where the leader of the herd is blind, and she leads the herd based on her memory of smells. So they respond best to positive reinforcement. They do much more. The mahouts from India and so forth would beat them elephants with canes to get them to do things. And the San Diego Zoo, one of the lead keepers, every year would spend about a month in India teaching mahouts how to do positive reinforcements. Forget the canes. Just being kind to the elephants, giving them special treats, they would do so much more. And the mahouts were adopting it because they saw the difference in what was going on. And I want to touch about that a bit more. Elephants fundamentally are a keystone species. They're environmentally important. They help with the existence of other animals. I just gave you examples of that, talking about digging the watering holes, opening up the tree. With new plants, as you've seen here a picture, seeds growing out of a dung ball, even insects. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if we lose the elephants, plants will grow somehow else. When mammoths and mastodons lived in North America, mammoths and mastodons loved Osage oranges. And we had Osage orange trees all over North America. Okay? People don't like Osage oranges. One, the exterior is sticky, they're tough, a lot of seeds. You can't find them in the store. You might find a couple of them in a botanical garden or maybe old family farms. The old farmers liked them because the wood was so hard termites couldn't eat it. A fence post would last 80 or 90 years. Okay? They would take the fruit and put it under the crawl space of the house because spiders don't like this fruit either. So it kept the spiders out of the house. But when the mammoths and mastodons disappeared, okay, there was nothing that was doing a lot of propagation of these trees, and we lost many of these trees. Okay, so you don't find them. So we don't know what the impact is going to be to the plant environment when we lose these. There is a close symbiotic relationship between different species of plants and different species of animals. And when you lose one, you can lose the other. And it has implications for us as well. Now, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, okay? These are not politicians. These are scientists from around the world, okay? Study animals and rate whether they're endangered or not critically endangered. If you hear, some countries' Department of Animals or whatever rate, it's many times politically motivated what rating they're giving them. So if you're going to look at ratings, look at the IUCN's ratings. That'll give you the truth about what's happening. Asian and African forest elephants are rated critically endangered, and the savanna elephants are rated endangered. In 1940, there were about 4 million African elephants. In 2016, the last time a census was done, we're down to about 400,000 to 500,000. In 2018, they did a census of Asian elephants, only about 46,000. The key problem is poaching for ivory, okay? Remember, you're buying old teeth and skin. Skin is a problem for the Asian elephants. Turn it into luggage. That picture you're looking at, there's about 200 tusks there. Don't think about it as 200 tusks. Think about it as 100 elephants that are gone for that. Now, you might want to shake your finger at the Chinese, and they are the largest market for this. But we need to wag a finger at ourselves. We're supposed to be an intelligent society, but the United States is the second largest market for slaughtering elephants and going for ivory. If you, as I said before, doesn't cure anything. If you like ivory carvings, save yourself money and buy Toganut carvings. Toganut comes from Toganut palm trees in South America. It looks identical to ivory, and the artisans who carve it are just as talented as the ones who do ivory. Okay? You saved a lot of money, and no animal died for it. Another problem is conflict with humans. Development. We don't pay attention to where elephants have been migrating for thousands and millions of years. So we put up developments in their way, and then, of course, there's going to be there's going to be conflict between the two. But there's hope, and it takes all of us. This is a picture of Roteti. It's an elephant orphanage in northern Kenya. There, they raise baby elephants who have lost their mothers to poachers. It started as a community-led program and gets a lot of support from accredited zoos. The not only funding, but even technical and physical support. The San Diego Zoo employs about 200 scientists full-time. They work around the globe on projects to save about 150 species. Some of the scientists work there. Back in San Diego, at the safari park, which is the breeding center, they're only allowed to have African elephants, one species, because they breed there. Using positive reinforcement, the keepers have the confidence of the females that when they're nursing babies, they'll let the keepers sample their milk. Now, composition of mother's milk changes as the baby ages. the proteins, the fats, the assets, and so forth. Scientists track this and see how the composition changes, and using that information, create baby elephant formula. Just like you would go into a supermarket and buying formula for different age babies, same thing is happening here. That information is supplied to the scientists working in Africa, in Kenya. So proper formula is made for these baby elephants that they can grow up healthy and go back to the wild. Elephants Without Borders, another program started by scientists working for accredited zoos, teaching community people about where are the normal migratory paths of elephants, getting countries to allow the elephants to pass uninterrupted. All this, is funded by accredited zoos. The 240 accredited zoos in North America supply close to $250 million in funding to save animals around the world. And they're really the backbone of conservation, and people don't recognize their importance. So they fund sanctuaries, the scientists provide education. They even fund security rangers to fight against the poachers. So it's important to support our zoo. Now, the St. Louis Zoo doesn't work in the wild with African elephants, to my knowledge. My knowledge is that they work with Asian elephants and are involved in a program to reintroduce Asian elephants into the wild. Hopefully, at some point, I'll be able to tell you more about that. I start my training as a docent at the St. Louis Zoo in about 2 more weeks, so that I'll be able to work there. So, as I said, support our zoo and don't buy ivory. A couple of fun facts before we break. Elephants purr like cats. I never knew they could do that. Until, remember Tembo at the beginning of my slideshow? One day I got to feed her a cucumber. Cucumbers, it turned out, were her favorite food, and she purred right there for me because she really enjoyed getting her cucumber. Now, baby elephants can get up and walk in a matter of minutes. It takes humans the better part of a year, give or take. It takes them 4 to 6 months to learn how to use their trunk. And for 4 to 6 months, that trunk is in your way every time you're trying to nurse from your mom. Now, human babies, we suck our thumbs, to self-soothe. Baby elephants will suck the end of their trunk to self-soothe. Like many of us, elephants like alcohol, and they're known to raid illegal stills in the forest. And genetically, their closest relatives are manatees, or I should say living relatives. Their closest living relatives are manatees, a sea mammal, and hyrax, which is basically the size of a groundhog. If you want to learn more about elephants, my favorite read is Elephant Memories. Cynthia Moss, scientist, studied elephants for almost 50 years. This book chronicles a 13-year period in her life where she trails after a single herd of elephants. And the great thing about it, Cynthia writes in layman's terms. It's not scientific jargon that's going to put you to sleep. I'll give you an example. She talks about when elephants come across the bones of a deceased elephant, the herd will stop and they'll feel the skull with their trunk. And if it's a relative, they stay there and they mourn just like a human being going to a cemetery. If it's not, they move on. And she knew they were right because over 13 years, she documented where the family members had died. So it's a lot of interesting reading. The other one that I have is just this really entertaining story. Elephant Company is a book, true story. An English soldier survives trench warfare in the First World War. Comes home to England to find work. The only thing he can find is a job working for an East India timber company, harvesting trees using elephants. He knows nothing about elephants or harvesting trees. Back then, he simply beat them with canes. He comes in time to learn if he uses positive reinforcement, he gets more work done. But the interesting aspect of the story, I'm not going to tell you how it ends. It ends at the start of the Second World War when the Japanese invade Burma and the unbelievable things that the elephants do. So I say thank you very much for listening to me. I hope next time you go to the zoo that you can appreciate the elephants a lot more and enjoy them a lot more. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. Yes, sir.
I'm a native St. Louis, and I remember riding on the back of an elephant at the zoo. You still allow children to ride elephants at the zoo?
I'm not that familiar with the St. Louis Zoo for that, but I would probably guess not, because the same thing used to happen at the San Diego Zoo. Before we knew as much about animals as we did, we often let guests ride different animals and so forth. That doesn't occur anymore. And to my knowledge, accredited zoos don't do that anymore.
And the second question I had was, are there foundations or groups that are providing financial assistance for the propagation and expansion of the elephant herds?
There are a number of elephant-oriented nonprofits. But I'll tell you in all honesty, all you have to do is support your local zoo. If you're particularly interested in elephants, then designate the contribution as to go to elephants. And I know that the St. Louis Zoo has an active program helping Asian elephants.
I was thinking more in terms of the native in South Asia and Africa, where the governments perhaps are helping in some way.
Well, you have a lot of governments that have gotten on board, and they work in concert with non-governmental organizations from around the world and accredited zoos. And the accredited zoos do have sway. I can give you an example that I know of in Africa. There was a country where they were going to open up a reserve for mining. And the San Diego Zoo pressured the government and has enough of a reputation that the government backed away and kept the reserve in place to protect the gorillas, who were quite endangered in that region. This was in near Cameroon. Yes, ma'am.
When we were in Zimbabwe, we were taken to a rescue place, and they had a lot of elephants that were trapped, and either they died and they took the babies, or they brought them back and healed them. And we were allowed to ride with them. There was someone on the elephant with us, and we could feed them. Interesting.
Yeah, now you will get that in the foreign countries. You'll be able to do that. I've heard of that occurring in Asian countries as well. But amongst the accredited zoos in North America, I'm not aware that they do that any longer.
But this was, they were making money from us to keep it going.
Absolutely. You've got a lot of programs like that to do that, to fund sanctuaries and so forth.
I think maybe we can take one more question for Len. We really exceeded the time we asked him to be with us. Anyone? One last question, anybody? Are we good? Then let's everybody please thank Len for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you very much.
And I guess I can aptly say thank you so much, and we hope you'll come back. Okay.